he's listening to this now, he'll probably come back and hunt me down now and kill me. But
the joy of still being alive after something like that.
You know, I think there's a difference between believing there's a God and accepting Christ. My platoon sergeant was like, hey, everybody stop hopping around.
Yeah.
He's like, we're in a minefield.
Hey guys, welcome to the Patriot Point Show. I'm here with my co-host, Randy Roselle, retired Navy SEAL, Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt. We have a very special guest today, Nick. Nick is just an amazing guy. We're really happy to have him as our first guest. This is a little bit of a redo. We had some audio issues with the last episode, so we're just gonna just rehash it really quick. I'm excited to hear everything, again, and then delve into some things some more. So you're very humble. I know you won't say too much about yourself, but I wrote a little something just from what I know about Nick. Right here, Nick Wright is a Christian, a father, and a husband. Nick is a Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt under Patriot. He's also an accomplished entrepreneur. He runs his own HVAC business, Texas Air Pro, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, specifically South Lake, right, mainly? Yeah. Nick is also a relatively new Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt and has been training combat sports for over a decade. Prior to his entrepreneurial pursuits and his Jiu-Jitsu journey, Nick was a Force Recon Marine, now known as MARSOC, and had multiple deployments to combat zones overseas as a special operator. So yeah, Nick is an incredible guy, an incredible Christian, pardon me, and we're just really happy to have him on the show. And I'll just kind of intro this like we did last time. Could we just kind of start at the beginning and start from your childhood? I know you grew up in the area, but yeah, just take it away, please.
Yeah, man. I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Richland Hills specifically. Graduated from Richland High School. Had a pretty average life. My mom and dad both worked really hard. I have two younger sisters, it's kind of like we talked about before. I kind of grew up in the area where there was no cell phones back then. I mean, you had bikes. I grew up when it was like we played football, basketball, and rode our bikes around all summer. And our parents didn't really know where we was at most of the time. Like, it was great, Yeah. They didn't really know till we showed back up and kind of told them what we did all day long. Mm-hmm. That was back in the days where there was pay phones when you had to check in.
Yeah, it sounds like how I grew up.
Yeah, yeah. And but I grew up, graduated from Richland High School, and kind of the story we talked about before is becoming a Christian. I didn't get saved until I was 18. I'd spent a couple of years of high school just kind of getting in trouble and being a kid, and wasn't for lack of wasn't for being a malicious heart. I just thought being a teenager meant you was supposed to have as much fun as possible, and one thing led to another. I'd actually dropped out of high school my senior year. Mm-hmm. And again, just having fun, wasn't living at home with my parents. And my mom and dad were believers prior to all of this. They just, as they was raising us kids and life got busy, they had just kind of ventured out of church and kind of grown away from it a little bit. And, again, I grew up in a family where, we prayed over meals and things like that. And
nice.
God was mentioned in my home throughout my upbringing, but no exposure to biblical teaching. We didn't grow up in church. It was rare that we went. But my parents were about as good as it got as far as moral principles. They tried to point us in the right direction all times, but my dad had to work so much just to make ends meet. We were not what I would consider poor by any means, but we had necessities, and that was it. At like 14 years of age, I was taught how to mow a yard years before that, but at 14 years of age, I was pretty much told, hey, if you want anything extra, you're going to have to start doing some stuff to earn the money to get it. So I've always been taught to work hard. My dad taught me. He worked from sun up to sundown, and even after, he'd have a full-time job. He worked side jobs. He had a small remodel business that he did on the side that was doing really well. So, he just worked a lot. My mom did too. And then you've got teenage kids, and they had my youngest sister would have been a toddler at the time. That's just not easy. It's a full-time job even when you're not at work for them.
Oh, yeah.
But I kind of found my way into having fun and trying to be a part of the crowd in school, and one thing led to another. I just kind of really ventured off path. Found myself getting in quite a bit of trouble, and then dropped out of school my senior year. Wasn't living at home, wasn't really welcome at home for good reason. But my dad, this is the faith part of what we talked about before, was my dad being a believer. I forget exactly where he was headed at the time, but he tells that his testimony and story for our family was, he was driving somewhere, was all quiet in the car, and God just started dealing with him. And, when he tells this story, he tells it way better than I do, but God just started dealing with his heart, and he was really burdened about just kind of where I was at, being his oldest son at the time, my sister, just where our family was. And it's like God started impressing on him, like, okay, giving you a chance to do everything you thought you needed to do, but you haven't pointed them toward me, kind of thing. That's how he tells the story.
Wow.
And my dad literally says, man, he turned the car right around and headed back to the house. I think it was a couple hours out at the time. And, man, he walked in and told my mom, hey, I know what's wrong. I know what we need to do. I know what we haven't done. We need to put all this in God's hands and try to get our kids reeled back in. And I remember this. Him and my mom had started attending a church that my aunt and uncle was going to at the time. And, God just really got a hold of my dad's heart. I hate to say the word again, but just kind of brought him back in close. And my dad started making a lot of changes in his personal life that I could see even at the time. But like I said, I wasn't living at home. And probably after a few months of this, I remember him wanting me to come by the house one evening. Him and Mom wanted to talk to me. And I remember sitting down in the living room and him saying, hey, we'd like for you to move back in and be here at the house. We want to be around you. The only thing we're asking is that you just, whatever you got going on, don't bring it in the house. And there's one condition, though. You got to be in church on Sunday morning with us for an hour. And, man, for me, I thought that was great, because at that time, me kind of being off path, I always loved my parents, always wanted to be around them. I just thought having fun was more important. And so I moved back in with him, and everything went as planned. I mean, he stuck to the deal, and I stuck to my end of the deal. And then leading into that summer, my dad had quit working for the company he was working for.
How old were you at the time then?
I would have been 18 years of age.
18, okay.
Yeah. And he had quit working for the company that he worked for at the time and wanted to take his business that he had been building and kind of make it more full-time. And I mean, and again, as a testament to my dad's work ethic, the minute he gave his notice to that company, and like I would almost say the day after, they contacted him, said, hey, pretty much like, hey, since you won't work on our payroll, can we contract you to do all the HVAC maintenance on one of our properties out in Dallas? It's like this, like they found a way to rehire him kind of. Yeah. And I remember him coming in, and I didn't have much going on. Like I said, I dropped out of school. And I remember him coming in and saying, hey, I've got this thing going on with work. I really need some help, and I don't have time to find help. And it worked out great because it made it easy for me. I spent all day with him working. And, there's a story behind how I got an HVAC with that, that operation that summer with him. But, as I was helping him day in and day out, he'd kind of come to me with this idea about going to church camp. Now, keep in mind, I was still kind of doing everything I was doing before. I was just kind of running around,
Just going to church on Sundays?
Oh, yeah, just showing up on Sunday, man. And
well, that's where it starts.
Yep. And but he'd presented this idea to me that youth camp was coming up that summer. and him and my mom really wanted me to attend it. Now, as he brought this up, I just kind of shrugged it off. I was like, yeah, we'll talk about that later. And he'd keep bringing it up. And I just kind of let him know, like, hey, look, I'm too old for that kind of thing. And that's not what our deal was. Our deal was 1 hour on Sunday. And, it actually started causing a lot of tension between us. So he just kind of backed off. Well, we got a couple weeks out from it. And like I said, I was kind of a troubled kid. I'd been in a little bit of trouble, had been arrested a couple times, and had some money, that I'd owed him for getting me out of trouble and stuff. Yeah. And I was trying to pay some of that back, but he came to me one afternoon and said, hey, me and your mom got talking, and was like, if you'd just be willing to go to youth camp for this 1 week, he's like, I'll kind of pretty much wipe your debt clean. And I was like, man, that would be nice, because at that time I'd owed him quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
And so I kind of sat on that and weighed on it a little bit. And it wasn't really about him clearing my debt that I owed him, as it was I could see how important it was to him that I go. And like I said, I did appreciate my mom and dad. Although I wasn't the most respectful teenager, I did appreciate them. Mm-hmm. And so I gave in to going, and as we'd talked before, I remember getting to youth camp, and I'd always believed there was a God. I think there's a difference between believing there's a God and accepting Christ. And I remember getting to youth camp, and I got about a day in. It was an interesting environment, what I was used to. Most of these kids that are going to church camp they're church kids. Yeah. I wasn't a church kid. Yeah. And they looked different than me. They talked different than me. They were just into different things than I was. And I remember being there a day into it, kind of undistracted. And the preacher that was preaching at this camp was an artist. And in church camp you do like a church service in late morning, and then you do one later again in the afternoon, and this is kind of a day in everyday setting. And he would draw these pictures while he was preaching to the kids.
That's cool.
And yeah, it was really, really neat. And just kind of kept the kids' attention. But man, he started talking about the story about Jesus and just what he came for, why he had to come, why he had to do what he did on the cross, and who he did it for. And as he got into that who he did it for kind of thing, he started talking about sinners and stuff like that. And man, as he started talking about that part of it, I started recognizing, like, man, that's me, And
it's all of us, Nick.
Yeah, it's all of us. But at that time, it was all about me.
It was really speaking to you, huh?
Yeah. And man, I just remember I started getting really, really, really uncomfortable and a little concerned. And I want to say it was either the second or the third day into camp, I'd had about all I was going to hear of all this, like I was doomed kind of thing. And, I remember it was one afternoon, or after the evening service, I remember heading back to the little bunkhouse that we was staying in, and I kind of started packing my stuff up. And one of the counselors came in. I said, hey, man, I need to get out of here. And I was pretty set on, hey, you need to get my parents down here, or y'all need to bus me back, or I'm about to start walking. I'm like, man, I'm 18. I don't have to be here. And I'm leaving one way or the other, because I've had all I'm going to.
Why did you want to leave? Were you scared?
Yeah, actually, I really was, to tell the truth. If you read the story of the Bible and just know anything about what Christ did for us, we started talking about what a sinner was, what sin was. And that's kind of where I'd cut the message off. I recognized my need, who I was as a person. And, as that preacher was talking about all this, and I'm actually looking at it for the first time, I'm reading along in the Bible. I'm seeing it with my eyes. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's irrefutable. If you believe the Bible and it's written there, there's nothing more you can say. Mm-hmm. but I was scared. You know,
Yeah.
I just, the more he talked about it, I'm like, dude, you're talking about me. Like I'm condemned, dude.
What
I'm
did
the
you
one.
think leaving would do? You think you could run from Jesus?
Man, I think so. I don't know.
You didn't know.
I
You
just know.
You just kind of freaked out, huh?
Yeah, I just did not
Okay.
want to hear any more of this. You know, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like I think what
Hmm.
most people do, and especially young people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's easy. I think people want to live in a state of denial when something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you either want to bury your head in the sand and hope it just goes away, or you confront it head on. There's not really an in between. You know.
Yeah.
And I was kind of in that, hey, I need to just kind of get away from hearing this. If I can get away from here, maybe I'll shake this off. But man, the counselor that came in at the time, and I'll never forget this. I mean, I can even remember what he was wearing at the time. I mean, the setting. Man, I remember I was in the bunkhouse. I was sweating. I mean, I think I'd taken my shirt off and had to change my shirt because I was sweating through it. And he was like, hey, man, just calm down a second. What exactly are you so upset about? I'm like, man, all the stuff he was talking about in there. And he's like, what did he say that upset you? And I carried on and explained my concern to him. I said, man, all the stuff he's talking about. I'm like, dude, that's me and then some. He's like, okay, he's listening to me. He's being real patient. And he's like, well, man, he was like, you didn't finish listening to everything he had to say, though. You missed the best part. And I just wasn't wanting to hear it. I'm like, dude, you don't understand. I'm not like the rest of the kids here. And I remember saying this. I'm like, I didn't just get in trouble because I didn't clean my room up. You know, like I've got some serious things that I've done in my life that I'm in trouble for. And he said, it doesn't matter. You missed the best part, man. He's like, you cut it off right before the best part of the whole story. And he's like, man, if you'll just calm down and give me a few minutes, I would like to just revisit this. And he opened up the Bible, and he kind of finished the tail end of the story, man, about why Christ came and who he came for. I mean, he came for me. He came for everybody. Now, you don't have to accept that, but that's what he came for. You know, it's a free gift for all of us. And, man, when he had exposed me to that, that evening, I'd accepted Christ as my Savior, and to this day, you know, I remember what that felt like. I mean, I felt like a new person right then and there. And I remember coming back from youth camp and just my perspective on things had changed against my will. You know, I didn't know this. I didn't know this existed. And I remember coming back from camp, just kind of being in a different position in the way I thought and everything, and trying to immediately get back around my buddies and my friends. And I just couldn't settle in and participate in some of what I was participating in before. I just was uncomfortable. I was unsettled. I was just kind of looking at things from a different angle, like, man, this just doesn't feel like it used to. This just does not seem as pleasing as it used to prior to a couple of weeks ago. I mean, this is like an overnight change that took place inside of me. And my dad does a really good job explaining this. You know, people question this all the time. And they're like, man, how can you know? You say you can feel this inside of you. My dad did this one time with somebody. He said, hey, turn around real quick. Person turned around and said, open up your hands. My dad took his keys and he put them in the person's hands, and they closed their hands. He said, well, what do you got in your hands? A set of keys. My dad looked at me and said, well, how do you know? It's like, well, I can feel it. He's like, yeah, but you can't see it. It's like, yeah, but I can feel it, and I know what keys feel like. And that was kind of my dad's explanation on how a believer knows that they know. I mean, it's written in the Bible. We know that we know. And, you know, and it's not that after that, you know, my life kind of cleaned up drastically. By the time we got toward the end of that summer, I'd all pretty much had, I hate to say the word excluded myself from my old friends, but I kind of had to, you know, because I was trying to share this with them. You know, a new Christian. I didn't even know my job was to share the gospel at that time, but I was naturally trying to share what I found to be a newfound joy with people I cared about. You know, you're my friends. I mean, you're the first people I should want to tell about this. No one told me, hey, now your job's to go tell people. I was just naturally trying to share it, and I didn't know how to share it. And so, you know, probably over a couple months, you know, just my time in hanging out and my taste buds kind of changed a little bit with a group that I was running with before. And the things that I wanted to do with my life was like, hey, man, I want to be better. I want to be better used. I want to be somebody. You know, just my motivation and everything had changed. And I remember going back to my mom and dad saying, hey, I'd like to try to get back into the school system and graduate and finish school.
How long have you been out at that point?
I had dropped out probably almost midway through my senior year of high school. And, you know, I mean, who drops out their senior year? But about midway through is when I dropped out.
A confused young man.
Very, yeah.
Yeah.
And, but I remember going back before school started, trying to register for school, and I remember the counselors and the teachers were just kind of like, oh no, like you're not coming back here. Like, you know, some of them were just kind of glad to see me leave. And I remember going back a couple of different times and trying to plead my case, and I think back on it now, and it's kind of comical. I'm thinking every stand-up person I knew in my life at the time, you know, school teachers, police officers, whatever. I'm just thinking, well, all these people know who Christ is. They're good people, you know. And I remember being in there like, no, man, I'm different, you know. Like I found Jesus this summer, and they were like, oh yeah, like yeah, you found Jesus, okay,
sure you
yeah,
did.
sure you did. Everybody says that, and you know, just really kind of heartbroke over it because I'd also decided at that time. I wanted to graduate so I could go into the Marine Corps. And so, man, I remember my mom had to go back up there with me, and we had to have a meeting with them. And, you know, they said, hey, tell you what, we'll allow you to enroll back into the high school, but here's the deal. You know, you have to stay in this one classroom all day. It was a transition class. And it was kind of a last chance program for kids that had been in trouble or were on the edge of getting kicked out and things like that. And it was like, you go into this room, you don't get to go out during the passing period and mix with all the other students. They just want you to stay in here. And the teachers would bring the assignments to you. And it was like a sink or swim. If you can do it this way, great. If not, we'll see you around. And, man, I went in there and just kept my nose down and did all my assignments, graduated with good – I mean, I finished school that year with good grades. A lot of the teachers that despised me before, man, I had pretty much won them over by the end of the year. And matter of fact, a couple of years after that, when I got married, a lot of them came to my wedding ceremony. Cool. And,
nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was
That's cool.
It was a total change in testimony. It was a turnaround for me, for them to get to see a student in such a short period of time make such a change. It was a good testimony to them, you know. But I graduated, and I remember going into the recruiting office and telling them, "Hey, look, I've got to get out of here as soon as I graduate. Like I can't spend the summer hanging out. Like I need to get moving here." And you know, I remember going in and signing up and taking the going in what they called the delayed entry program. And you know, basically all that is the recruiter at the time just kind of keeps tabs on you. You know, it's kind of like you're committing to going as long as you finish school. And I remember going in and asking them, hey, you know, what's the hardest thing to do in the Marine Corps? You know, like what's the highest? Like what's the special forces in here? And they're like, oh, it's Force Recon, it's reconnaissance. I'm like, well,
why'd you choose the Marine Corps?
You know, at that time, I just I wanted to do what I thought was the hardest thing.
Yeah,
You know, it's the hardest.
Seemed like the toughest.
Yeah, I just wanted to do the toughest thing. You know, teenage boys, young men, they all just that's just what they want to do. You know. You know, that's why I don't ever knock on that. You know, I think young men get a bad rap. It's like, oh, they think they're 6 foot tall and bulletproof. I'm like, Yeah, I know what you mean. That can be harmful, but that's also a good thing. That's a young man just filling out young manhood. I mean, to some degree.
We need young men like that.
I agree. I totally agree.
This nation is lacking young men like that.
Yes, sir.
I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I remember walking in and asked them that, and they said, "Oh, recon is the hardest thing in the Marine Corps." And I'm like, "Well, sign me up for that." And they're like, "Well, man, it doesn't work that way. You've got to go in, you get through boot camp, and then you go try out for this unit. You don't just sign up for it." And so I remember going to boot camp and getting out of boot camp. I was a squad leader the whole time I was in boot camp. Did real well in SOI. I got assigned to 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines.
What's SOI?
SOI is the School of Infantry.
Okay.
So like after boot camp's over, whatever you went in for your MOS, which is your occupation specialty, they send you to a school to train you for that after boot camp.
Copy.
And then you go to the fleet, So once I got out of SOI, I got sent to 2-5, which was just over the hill from SOI on Camp Pendleton. And I got there, I was an anti-tank assaultman, but I remember getting there and them saying, "Hey, we got a lack of machine gunners who would like to be cross-trained to be a machine gunner." And I raised my hand. I was like, "I'll be a machine gunner. I'd rather be a machine
guns sound cool.
Yeah, just machine guns sound cool. Again, you're young, Marine, it's like machine guns just sound cool, And I'm a mechanical guy. That's why I got into HVAC. But when I got put over into a CAT team, it's a combined anti-armor team. When I was with the grunts, I just loved machine guns. I just wanted to be the best gunner I could be. And, I remember when we did our first deployment over with the 31st MU, which was in Okinawa, I was young, married at the time.
Nick, can you explain what a MU is for our listeners that don't know?
Yeah, it's a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and what they're designed to do is at any given time, we have one that is floating around out in the various parts of the world on a ship. Okay, and at any moment, they can hit the nearest beach anywhere they need to, or they can deploy and be boots on ground at any moment as fast as possible. So most of your units do what's called a workup, and it'll be 6 months to a year long, and then they do a 6-month MU deployment. It's a rotation. And then you come off of that, then the process starts all over again. But when one unit comes off of a MU, there's another one that just finished a workup that literally gets right on the ship and is right back out we call it a float. There's a lot of slang terms for it, doing a pump, doing a float. But that's your deployment for 6 months. Then you come off of it and it kind of starts all over again. And, when we was in Okinawa, Japan, so we 2-5 could deploy with the 31st MU. I was young, married at the time, where all the other guys are going out in town.
When did you meet your wife? I don't know if we touched on. I wanted to ask about that too.
Yeah, so my wife, Carrie, we've known each other most all of our lives. My grandmother owned a grooming shop for dogs, and her mom worked with my grandmother. Okay. They were best friends. And, my wife's a few years older than me, so of course I had a crush on her growing up. All my buddies did too. But that's how we met. Okay. And it wasn't until I left for the Marine Corps that I started getting kind of vocal about, how much I liked her and was attracted to her and stuff. And it was kind of a running joke. But, she stayed in communication with me the whole time I was in boot camp and everything, and just kind of more of family friend type stuff. And one thing led to another, and, we just kind of fell in love and awesome. got married very fast. And but we've been together for 24 years.
Wow. Congrats, man. That's awesome.
Thanks. It wasn't easy. There's some issues there that
we'll touch on that.
Yeah, during the military and afterwards. But at any rate, when I was with the 31st MU, I just spent all my time like going down to the armory while everybody was out in town on their free time, and I spent time just messing with those guns. I mean, I would go in there and lay out a poncho liner, and I mean, I would pull all those guns apart, and I had the machine gun book in there with me, and I mean, I was studying everything, headspace and timing on them, and cycle rates, and I just remember disassembling and assembling these things over and over and over, and you know, a lot of my friends that I was in 2.5 with, that you know, a lot of them will probably hear this episode, and they'll attest to this, man. I mean, I was just eat up with the guns. And I was in a heavy machine gun platoon, so the 50 cal was one of our weapons that we used, and the receiver. Oh yeah, and you know, when you're in the infantry, they do these battalion and company hikes. I mean, everything is about those humps are some of the hardest things that they do, and people don't understand. They think, oh, well, you just walk for 10 miles, 15, 20 miles. And no, it's a high-paced thing with a lot of gear. And
boots probably do, right? And
what's that?
Probably in boots, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's full load out of gear. I mean, it's rough. And, you know, I just always, you know, we had multiple guns in our platoon, and the platoon is responsible for getting all that gear from start to finish. And in most of the crews will take turns rotating that gear out. You know, one guy will carry the receiver for a little while, and then he'll switch it off to another guy, and that's just how you get through. But, man, I was just really gifted with the ability to be able to carry that gun for a long ways. And, you know, several of these hikes, I'd carry the gun and not pass it off at all. Some of that was just by choice, simply because I just, in my heart, I felt like it made it easier on the team and the platoon. If you could carry it, keep it, you know, until it's time to pass it off, you know. And I did real well with that. But, yeah, I was a machine gunner at heart. Still feel like I am to some degree. You know, my heart and my background came from the infantry, but man, I had a long-term goal to eventually go try out for First Force Reconnaissance Company. And when we got back from deployment, my wife, she got pregnant, and I started kind of picking up rank really quick. I promoted fast when I was in the Marine Corps. Every promotion I had but one was meritorious. You know, I really loved what I did. Was all the way in on it. I believed in it. I wanted to do it for the full career. Even being married, my wife being pregnant, which the military is hard on a young married couple. But man, I just believed in it. It's what I wanted to do. And so I kind of, once she got pregnant, had backed off the idea of going and trying out for First Force Reconnaissance. And reason being is now I'm picking up rank. I'd picked up sergeant. It just, like 2 years and 2 months, I'd pinned sergeant, which is extremely fast in the Marine Corps. And honestly, I think maybe a little too fast. I wasn't necessarily looking for rank. I think it's just a product of trying to be the best Marine I could be, and the best gunner I could be. It wasn't really about being a better Marine than everybody else. I just wanted to be the best I could be. And it ended up promoting me quick. And, you know, the idea of having a little more responsibility and billets changing and stuff wasn't so bad. You know, we got a baby on the way. And so I kind of backed off the idea of going to the recon teams until we started getting all the talks about going over to Iraq. And once these talks started ramping up and things were getting ready to go over and stage in Kuwait, man, we had gotten in our new group of Marines from boot camp. So, Randy, you'd probably be familiar with this, but when you get these groups in, they're often referred to as boots. Okay, they're new. They've got no fleet experience, no deployments under their belt. And, you know, I remember being a sergeant and being a team leader. You know, it's like the company encourages you to sit down with these guys and, you know, you get to know them. That's what a leader does. Hey, man, why'd you join the Marine Corps? Where are you from? What's your family like? And, man, I remember sitting down with some of these guys, and they were super gung-ho, and, you know, a lot of them were like, oh, man, I joined Marine Corps Infantry because, you know, I wanted to go to war. And like, yeah, okay. Yeah, you want to go to war. So, but then when time came up to go, there were some guys that made it through all this training, which is not the easiest thing to do. But when it was time to actually start loading up to go, they were like, "Well, wait a minute, maybe I don't want to go," kind of thing. And I was kind of being held accountable for some of that. There was guys that were going out and purposely getting in trouble to try to get out of going. Not everybody that joins the military is joining for the right reason. Some people join to just kind of get away from their circumstances or, schooling benefits or something of that nature. And that kind of shows, when it was time to load up and go, there was people like, well, I don't want to go. How can I get out of this?
I never understood that mentality.
I never did neither. And in fact, it caught me super off guard. And I was being held accountable for this, which was making it hard on me being a young sergeant in an infantry battalion. Again, a little too young, in my opinion, for that type of a role. I just didn't have any answers for it. I'm like, man, if they don't want to go, they don't want to go. I mean, why would we want them to go? Kind of, that's my mentality.
Yeah, you can't trust a coward.
Exactly. And, man, I remember coming home one evening heavy-hearted about all of this and talking and praying with my wife. And, she kind of come up with the idea. She was like, what can you do about the situation? And I just remember telling her, like, hey, if I'm going to go over and go to war, I'm going to go with a group of guys that want to be there. And it's not that the infantry unit I was with didn't want to go. They did. But my heart just never left wanting to be in the recon teams. And I remember going back and talking to my company first sergeant. And if he's listening to this now, he'll probably come back and hunt me down now and kill me. But I remember going and talking to him about this, and he was really big on lead Marines, and he was good at it. But I remember talking to him about trying to go out and take the screening at First Force. And the screening is just it's like a little miniature in-dog. All they're trying to do is just make sure they're not wasting their time with you. That you physically have got enough to potentially make it. And, they did that at the end of the month. And I remember going and asking him about going over and trying out for it. And, man, he just looked at me and said, "You're not going anywhere." He's like, "You're going to stay right here and lead Marines." He's like, "So no, you can't go over there and do that." And I remember it just it just shattered me, And there was another first sergeant in our battalion at the time who was he had been in the teams for quite a while, but in the Marine Corps, he had taken on a new assignment, coming over to fill a first sergeant billet with a company in our battalion. And I remember catching him one day outside saying, "Hey, first sergeant, I had a question for you." And I said, "Man, I'm kind of thinking about going and trying out for First Force and wanted to bend your ear about that a little bit." And so he gave me a time to meet him over at his office. I remember sitting down and kind of telling him my situation. He goes, "Well," he said, "I kind of understand it that your first sergeant's on leave next week." And he was like, "I know your captain, the company commander, always wanted to be a recon guy." He's like, "Why don't you go talk to him about it?" And I remember sitting across from his table, and he leaned over and he goes, "But let me tell you something." He goes, "If anybody ever finds out that I told you to do that," he goes, "I'll make your life a living hell." He was like, "If you make it over there or not," he's like, "because I know everyone there." And so I said, "Roger that, First Sergeant." I remember going and talking to my company commander, and he was really motivated about what I wanted to do. He tried out for it, couldn't make it, but man, he gave me the green light to go try out. So I went over and took the screening. Screening was easy, but once you pass the screening, they give you 90 days. You get 90 days of TAD orders, temporary additional duty, and it's orders. So, and you basically at the end of the month they run the selection, and it's just pass or fail. You make it or you don't. But in between, they put you in what's called a RIP platoon. It's a recon indoctrination platoon, and man, that RIP platoon is just, man, you just get, murdered every day. You show up at the company, and and they kind of keep these guys off to the side. Like you're not one of the guys. You're not an operator. You are, and it's kind of like a fraternity. You got these guys that are trying to get in, and they just treat them like garbage. And it's these guys are all off to the side over here. It's like, hey, y'all stay over there. All the operators are standing in formation, and they're all wearing black PT gear, and they got the badge, and you just keep looking over like, man, I want to be one of them. I want to be with those guys. But the RIP platoon, man, you get up every day and you're just finning, you're swimming, you're ruck running, they're just beating the piss out of you. And they're trying to get you where you can pass the selection. And at the end of the month, they run it. And if you don't pass it, then you get another month of RIP platoon. And after the third time, it's just not for you. They just send you back to where you came from. And, man, I remember checking in that week, and that was the week that they was running the selection. I thought I was going to get a full month of being in the RIP platoon, and, man, I didn't. I remember the sergeant major of the company was like, oh, you're just in time for the selection. He was like, be ready to go at this time. And I was like, what? But I did real well with it. I passed it my first time out. And my wife at this time was 5, almost 6 months pregnant. And I remember BRC is down on Coronado Island at the Spec Warfare Training Center where Buds is. And I remember my son was born.
So BRC is Basic Reconnaissance Course,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir. Basic Reconnaissance Course. And it's 3.5 months long just on that portion of it. And I remember my son was born on the 31st of December. And my wife dropped me off on like the 4th of January. Yeah, and that was where my pipeline training had started, and it was nonstop. So, but after I'd made it through all of my training.
How did the training go?
So BRC is really truly what you would probably consider, if you're ever reading about this stuff, it's really kind of the selection. You have to make it through BRC. Just like the SEALs go through BUDS, you've got to make it through BRC to become an operator. And then after BRC, it's not over. You still got SEER school, jump school, scuba school.
Oh.
You've got all these things that you have to go through before they'll put you in a team back at your company. But BRC was just, it's hell, man. It's not necessarily designed to strengthen you. It's designed to teach you, but it's also designed to see if you're really supposed to be there. They're not really concerned with how fast you can run or how fast or far you can swim. It's like, can you do it when you're absolutely burnt and cooked? And then you think you're at the finish line, and they say, guess what? Now we're just getting started. Now we're going to do it all over again. And that's what they spend that time doing. And again, Randy, you'd probably be familiar with, I know he is, but I remember, man, it was like the second day in, they woke us up and they ran us out to Coronado Beach. And it's like 4 a.m. And I remember them putting us in the water. And it was like, yeah, you're just doing
Been there many times.
flutter kicks and push-ups. The waves are washing you back up on shore. They're telling you to get back in the water. Then you get out of the water, and we started running down the beach into the wind. And then right about the time the air starts drying you out, they put you back in the water. And you're just freezing and just miserable. And I remember them pulling up in a high back, and that master gunnery sergeant's like, man, there's too many of y'all here. Like, some of y'all don't belong here, and you know it right now. There was guys quit that morning.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just like, man, it's the first day in. But that was just how BRC was designed to be. You did learn, but the entire course was just meant to just break it off in you. Like, if you ever feel like you're going to quit, everybody had it go through their mind. But are you going to quit? And that's what it was designed to find out. But we started with 56 Marines in my BRC class, but we finished with 21 of us, but only 19 of us actually graduated. And of the 2 of those guys that didn't actually graduate, they finished the course, but they just didn't quite meet the standards they wanted to see. And I remember them presenting it to those two guys, like, hey, but you did good enough. We'll let you go through it again, kind of thing. And one of them was like, no, I'm not going through that again. Like, I'm just not supposed to be here. And then the other guy was like, I'll go through it again. And he did. And, man, I think he ended up leading the group through the next course.
Well, he knew what was coming.
Oh, yeah, he knew. And but then after that was SEER school.
Yeah.
But after that was SEER school, which was in Warner Springs at the time.
So, Nick, do you remember what SEER stands for?
Yeah, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape.
Yep.
And I believe you and I went through the same SEER.
We did.
SEER course in Warner Springs. So that's a fun course. Little bit of a layback from coming right out of BRC. You spend a week in class. They teach you. There's protocol if you're ever captured, or there's still military code we follow. There's still senior ranking in the group still calls the shots. You're just taught all those basic things, and which for us sitting in a class for a week and just learning this stuff was great. And then you go spend a week-ish out in the field just kind of wandering around with no food. There was we was in my class, there was BUDS guys in there, recon guys in there, and a lot of pilots. There's a lot of pilots in our course. And we're used to being on the ground and navigating and stuff and sleeping outside, but dealing with the pilots, they wasn't. So that's kind of what made the course entertaining and fun for us. And I remember wandering around for a few days. I mean, you just don't get anything to eat. You're just starving. And they teach you how to dig up, grass that you can eat.
I went through in December. It was snowing. There was nothing to eat.
And it's already cold in Warner Springs. I mean, I was there in the spring and it was freezing.
So it's that elevation. That's why. Yeah. That's why they're still on the ground, even though it's Coronado, San Diego area. Yeah. It's up in the mountains.
But we went through that, and I remember that was about the time that everybody had gone into the invasion in Iraq had happened. And man, I remember finishing up school and just thinking, man, like, we're missing it kind of thing. I mean, not to sound like, oh man, we're excited about war, but you go in to serve and
that's what you train for.
Yeah, and that's what you raised your hand for, and all your buddies are over there. And
what football team wants to go through 2 days and all the practices and not show up for game day?
Yeah, and then sit on the bench. You want to be in the fight, and then you got all your buddies and stuff, and the guys that you serve with are over there, and it's just where your heart is, And most people that have served understand what I'm saying. I mean, you don't pray for war, but if it's happening and that's what you're trained to do. I mean, it's just where your heart is. You want to be with your group. And I remember sitting back here going through all this training, and I'm like, man, we're missing it. Like, man, I really screwed up. I should be. If I would have just waited till after I'd got back with the infantry, I could have come over here. And but they were over in Iraq, and I remember coming out of SEER school and going straight to jump school, and out of jump school, getting sent to dive school. And by this time, man, the invasion and what we did over in Iraq didn't last very long. I mean, we kind of went over there and just took over the place. And, and then...
What year was that?
That would have been in 02, sorry, in 02. And, I remember...
I was in BUDS in 02, so I understand your feeling.
So we were in the same boat. So but it was like, you're thinking when they declared the war was over several months later, you're just like, we missed it. That's literally how you felt. You're like, all these guys are coming back and they got to go do the thing, and I missed it. And, I remember all the guys coming back to headquarters after I just got through with dive school, and it was just like, they got all these stories and this great thing they went over there and did, and you're just like, man, like, well, what am I going to get to go do now, And I got put in a team, and you know, we did some training, but I remember this was probably, you know, we pulled most of our military troops out of Iraq and left very few installations over there. And, you know, I think it was maybe about a year and a half, if I remember correctly. And, you know, you pulled the Iraqi army out in all the command, and what happened was just, it was a vacuum that got filled with all the surrounding terrorists in the area. Just kind of came in all these cities and just started taking over. And, you know, I remember things started heating up, and that's when they decided to send all the Marines back over to kind of go into these cities and take them back over again and stuff. And that was when my team was like, hey, you guys are going to go over with this wave.
How'd that feel?
I mean, yeah, you're like, well, man, I finally get to go over there and do something. But like in our mind, I was thinking, well, what are we going to do over there? Like, you know, it's just like the leftovers kind of thing. And I know this sounds horrible as you explain this to people, but
you feel like the game, you feel like it's over. So
like down in your heart, you're like, man, this is just like a sloppy seconds kind of thing going on here. And but we did a pretty fast workup. We did a small shooting package, did some surveillance training, and man, we loaded up and headed over. And
how long have you been a part of the team now at this point?
I've been in the company for, man, probably been about a year, a little over a year. Okay. And so once we loaded up and kind of geared up to go, we got over in country, and man, things were just different this go around. I mean, this was back when Fallujah was real big on the news, and the whole guerrilla warfare IED part of the game was new. That was not what was experienced on the invasion at all. And I remember getting to a particular area that we did quite a bit of work in near the Syrian border. It was over in Husayba. Man, it was just an outlawed town. I mean, it was literally like the border checkpoint. Like if you was going from California into Mexico and all the cars drive through. I mean, this was like right there. Wow. So it was like a stronghold for, you know, all these guys bringing all these rockets and IEDs and everything coming in. And so we was out there doing quite a bit of work. And, man, I just remember when we got to the area to settle in, I mean, all the CAT teams, which I used to be a part of prior to going into recon, were just destroyed. I mean, these infantry units were just hammered with IEDs. This is not something that we was used to. This was a new phase of the war. And, you know, it was just, I remember getting there, and one of the CAT teams was just completely dismembered. There was a couple of guys that had survived a few attacks from that entire CAT team, and the guy was being sent back to the States because the entire team had been destroyed with just a couple of weeks of being in country. And our job specifically, what we was doing was to do like counter IED placement. We did a lot of ambush patrols to try to deter and stop the IED placement from the insurgents that had come into the city.
The cash people putting them in.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. And we did a lot of surveillance to try to find, you know, where these caches were and stuff. Just try to find where they were, where the cells were at inside the city.
Did y'all raid them once you found out?
Yes, yeah, we did. And some were smaller raids, some of them were huge. But we did a lot of raids. We did a lot of counter IED, ambush patrols. But no matter what you did, these guys just they always found a way to get it done, you know. And these infantry guys that we were there to support were just, man, they were just being blown up left and right. I mean, and there was a FOB inside the city that we worked out of, and a FOB is a forward operating base. And it's basically, it's like a little sandcastle is all it is. It's not very big at all. It's constantly getting hammered by rockets and mortars and things like that. You know, you'll be in there, and if it's, you know, if you're not on an op or like for the infantry guys we was supporting at the time, if they weren't on a rotation out doing patrols or something through the streets, you know, they had some computers. They had an area where you could go send emails back home and stuff. I mean, you just be in there sending an email back home and a mortar would just land inside the fob. You know, then everybody get quiet for a second and listen, and then you start hearing guys outside laughing, and that's how you knew everybody was okay. You know, I mean, you start finding a dark sense of humor in these areas where it's like rockets would come in and hit. As long as everybody was okay, we just start laughing it off. Like, you know, you just got used to it.
Yeah. Survived another one.
Yeah. And but yeah, that was kind of a new phase of the war that we wasn't used to. You know, and it was a pretty violent exposure. When I was over there, there was no upgraded armor on any of the vehicles. Again, because we didn't know it was needed. You know, I mean, all the Humvees rolling around had no extra plating on them. And we rolled around and we had Humvees that were more like a truck. They had a truck bed on them and had benches because we did a lot of raids and stuff. Had a gun mount in the back, but you just were like sitting in the back of a truck on a bench. And I remember when they sent, after a couple months of being over there, we got these plates sent on the side of them to try to help with this stuff. But yeah, the vehicles had no up armor on them at all when I was over there. And, but as they started shipping that stuff over to us and the vehicles started getting upgraded, you know, it stopped, it helped, but it did not stop. They just beefed up what they was blowing everything up with. You know, and I remember being over there, you know, after just a few weeks of being in the area of operation we was working in, the infantry guys were kind of patrolling around one evening, and we sent a couple of our teams out to kind of walk with them and just kind of get the lay of the land, because these guys had been there for a little bit, and they were kind of like, hey, you know, we kind of keep an eye on this and these guys over here kind of thing. And there's a cemetery in the middle of the city, and their cemeteries over there have stone walls built around them. You know, it's not like here where you can drive down and you can look over in a cemetery and they keep it well groomed. Over there, they don't do that. Like, you can't see inside of it.
It's real tall.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the tactics that they would use is they would plant IEDs on the inside of those cemetery walls. And so as you're walking by it, they would detonate them where you couldn't see them laying there. But they'd be up on top of a rooftop somewhere, or in a two-story building where they could see over there, and when it would line up with you, that's when they would blow it.
Command detonate them.
Yeah, and one of the guys in our team had got hit just a few weeks in, and I mean, it just shredded the guy. He did survive, but had to get an immediate medevac out of there. And yeah, so I mean, it was just, again, this was just all new. This was a new type of war we was fighting at the time. And there was a lot of firefights that did take place, but not as much as trying to do the counter IED stuff and surveillance to try to stop some of that. Even outside the city, trying to find where it was coming in from outside the city, we did a lot of stuff to that nature when I was over in Iraq. But yeah, that's kind of the overview of my deployment over there and what we did.
Hey, Nick, you told an interesting story last time. You had talked about how one of your teammates had taken some breacher blankets, and put them on the bottom of your Humvee, and how that kind of saved you, and you were very thankful for him and that he did that. Do you mind sharing that with us again?
Yeah, absolutely. I
love this story.
In our unit, you know, again, like, you know, when you're in a special team, a lot of the gear and things we do are a little different. So some of the trucks we roll around in will look a little different than a standard infantry's trucks do, because our mission's a little different. And I would use the word, I don't personally always feel it's more special in my heart because of what I see the infantry guys go through, and that's where I came from. It may be a little more surgical, but you know, to me, the infantry guys, man, they are the gangbangers of the group, dude.
We used to say they're harder than we are.
Oh yeah,
because they're like, man, you know, when you get in special forces, especially as a SEAL, you're kind of treated like a rock star.
Yep.
You know, And then you see the infantry guys and just how they're sucking it up. And you're like, oh, man.
Yeah.
Like, these guys, they're tougher than us.
Oh, yeah. I
You
totally,
know,
totally
we may have
agree.
gone through tougher training,
Yeah.
but what they're doing out here, the way they're sucking this stuff up, like, you know, like, oh, man. So I always respected the snot out of them.
I agree totally. And, you know, we live in a day and age right now where, you know, the special units get a lot of attention. Everybody wants to hear the stories of that stuff. And I think that's great, but something that doesn't get a lot of light shed on it, and it should, was the infantry units of the Army and the Marine Corps. I mean, like I said, I always use the term. I'm like, dude, those are the
Going
real,
out doing those presence patrols and, like
man.
you said, just eating it.
just the mind and the grit, the heart. I mean, they are the gangbangers of the whole story. And they would just, I mean, they would literally come off of a patrol knowing that I'm just going to be walking around hoping somebody starts shooting at me today, trying to draw out fire.
That's what those presence patrols are. Like, hey, we're present.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like them walking out at high noon saying, here we are, if anybody wants some. But, you know, again, this was a new phase of the war where, you know, the way these insurgents were fighting, most of them, was they do these hard hits on them by trying to blow them up and then hit them with rockets. And then maybe the gunfire would come out after that. And whatever was left is what would re-engage with gunfire. And, you know, these guys would, you know, every day this was their life. You know, they get up and they patrol. If you're in a squad, you're on rotation, and that's all they do is just walk around the city hoping somebody wants to start something with them. And if, you know, in their 4 or 5 or 6 hour patrol that they do, they come back in and they're on what's called react. Well, what that means is they're not out walking around. There's, you know, more squads out there taking their place. They're there in case something does pop off. Then they load up and head out to engage in
QRF.
support. Yeah, QR, quick react force. And then they get a portion of time when they get to lay down and rest, and they're not on react. But when they wake up, man, this is their life. And, you know, 2 days ago, they could have just had several of their buddies blown up, and it's like, well, but you're back on now. I mean, you're back out walking the same streets you just blew up 2 days before. And, you know, so these guys, our job was really, it was to support them, you know. And, you know, you think being in a special unit, you know, you're the guy you're the team that's there to save the day. And it's like, man, really, we're there to support the cause of these guys, you know. And so, but we was assigned to do a presence patrol op on the outer part of the city, and we was kind of in between ops. I don't know what the particular reason for this was, but we was tasked with getting outside the city, and there was a ridge line along the city that they wanted us to go out and do a recon on, and it was more of a presence op just to show that we was doing something on the outside of the city. And I remember having this young guy that was attached to our unit. He was part of our comm shop, one of the guys that worked on our radios and stuff. And he was not an operator, but he was attached to our unit. He got deployed with us. And man, this young man just wanted to go on something with us. He wanted to go out with the team. And I remember he just kept being told, no, you can't, you know, you're not trained, you can't go on this. And this particular op was one that they felt he could go on, you know. And I remember he got assigned to be in my truck. And I remember as we was kind of going over the brief and going over what the op was going to be, and he got in my truck, and I remember this guy just asking me, he's like, hey, man, he's like what are we going to do? And I'm like, hey, you're not going to do anything. You're going to do exactly what you're told to do when you're told to do it. You know, this kind of thing. You just need to calm down is what you need to do first off. And but leading up to this story, a couple days prior to that, my teammate, I was in 5th Platoon, Team 3. One of the guys on my team, Patriot, when you're in vehicles, all of us have, spots. Like I was a machine gunner in the infantry, so I stood in the back of the truck on the gun mount. It just made sense. My ATL was the one that rode in the passenger seat of our Humvee, and then Pritchard was our driver when we was doing vehicle operations. And man, one day we had an op that had got canceled. They called it off. I can't remember what the reason was. And we had a quad con sent over there, and that's basically just a big metal supply box. We had all these additional blast blankets that we used when we did raids and stuff. You were breaching a door, and the team stays fairly close to that door. You could throw that blanket over the first couple of guys, and it would protect them from the blowback, some of the shrapnel when you do the breach. That way you could be really close to the door and go in once you blew that door, the breach. So at any rate, we had several of these blast blankets that we wasn't using. We had an overabundance of them. And he went down where our motor pool was, where we kept all the Humvees at, and he spent an entire day down there dragging some of those extra blast blankets out and screwing them and mounting them into the bed of this truck that we had.
What's the texture of them? Are they soft, or what type of blankets are you said they throw them over?
Yeah, it's like a Kevlar blanket.
Yeah, it's a very, very heavy blanket.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Copy.
And it's he took all these and mounted them inside of the bed of that truck, and man, he did that just for me. I mean, it was all just in the bed of the truck where I was at, and he's like, I remember him coming back. I was like, hey, where's Pritchard at? It's like, well, he must be in email. He might be using sat phone calling home, or. But I remember later that afternoon, he'd come in. It was a pretty windy day. He was all dirty, hot, sweaty. Just looked like he'd been rolling around in the dirt. And he said, hey, Nick, you're going to like what I did in the back of the truck, man. I took all these blast blankets. We had those extra ones, and I put them in the bed for you. In case we run over something, maybe it'll
Help out a little bit.
Yeah, help a little bit.
Dampen some of the blast.
Yeah. And I just remember kind of being frustrated at him, like, man, why didn't you say something? Maybe I would have come and helped. Like, you're just out there working, and everybody's in here just kind of doing their thing. And
made you feel like a turd.
Yeah. And, I remember being kind of bitter at him about it, and not as grateful as I am today. And man, it was a couple days later we was doing this op I was just telling you guys about, and we had just rolled outside of the city, and we got up on this ridge line, and and you don't ever just let your guard down, but you get in certain areas where you can kind of gear down a little bit.
Yeah.
And when you're in the city, I mean, you're on alert at all times. And we got up on this ridge line, and I remember all the trucks are just kind of moving in a formation. We're going down this road, and I remember just kind of looking out to the side and kind of letting my mind wander just a little bit about things going on back at home. Me and my wife were separated at the time. And I remember looking at that young man that was riding in the back of our truck. I mean, man, he's on the tailgate. I mean, he's at the ready. He's just looking around, excited to be there. And I just remember this white flash going off. I mean, it was like, man, if you've ever just been punched square in your nose, I mean, it was just like white went off. And I remember coming to, and when I came to, if you've ever been knocked out before, it's like you're waking up out of a dream. Like, I know something just happened. I don't recall what I was just doing before this. And as I opened up my eyes, I remember seeing the tail end of the truck, but I remember seeing the ground and the sky and everything was just not in its normal location. And it had just kind of started coming to me like, oh my gosh, we'd just been hit. Like, we got hit with something. And I remember as I was sitting up to look down, I thought like I was going to see like my lower half gone. And as I started looking down, I remember seeing my toes and my weapon. My M4 was laid over here on the side. And I remember grabbing it, and I grabbed it, so I knew I still had my arms. And I remember just kind of feeling along my sides, because our bullet bouncers at the time, they're open on the sides. You're protected in the front, which is why they teach you to shoot squared up, not from the
stack
side.
blades are,
Yeah, so, and I remember just kind of doing a quick feel as I was coming to, because I started reacting like something just went on. And I remember looking over there and seeing that young man just flopping around in the bed of this truck. I mean, just screaming. And I remember reaching over and trying to grab him and hold him down because I thought for sure he had got hit with something the way he was rolling around. And I remember doing a quick check on him and feeling in his chest plates and stuff, and he wasn't bleeding. He had all of his limbs. So I thought, okay, he's okay for now. And I remember turning and looking up toward the driver's seat and the passenger seat where the driver and my ATL was, and my ATL had reached over there and started grabbing me to pull me down. He had just come out of being knocked out as well, and he was like, get down, we just got hit. He had thought we got hit with a rocket. And Pritchard was in the driver's seat, and he had just come out of it too, but he was kind of like trying to move, those are automatic consoles on those Humvees, and he was like trying to move it like he was driving a stick shift. Like it had kind of knocked him out of it as well. And what had happened was we had run over an AP mine, an anti-personnel mine. And when we actually ran over it and detonated it, and it just blew the whole back half of the truck out. And, by this time, our other trucks had stopped. The dust had settled. They had started making their way back to our truck. And I remember sitting there and seeing a couple of the guys run around the back of the truck, and they saw me sitting there. They looked at me. Saw everybody was okay, and they were like, "You're alive!" And I was like, "Yeah." And I remember everybody just started jumping up and down and hooping and hollering, and I mean laughing. Like I said, you start finding a dark sense of humor over there. What you find funny is just what keeps you sane. And I remember everybody turning toward the city and screaming "F you," and they're flipping the city off like, "Oh, you missed
Not
us,"
today.
kind of thing. Yeah, not today. I
Survive,
mean,
yeah.
everybody's like grabbing herself and stuff and dancing around and about this time, everybody's cameras are coming out. They're taking pictures. Everybody's posing with a blowed up truck and stuff. And our headquarters truck that was with us had tried to get a hold of an engineer unit to come drag this busted Humvee out of the middle of nowhere. And they're like, "Well, hey, we're going to head back down to the fob and see if we can't get somebody up here to help get this truck out." And as they were driving off over the hill, I remember looking back toward them and watching them drive away. And just as I laid eyes on that truck, it probably got, 300 meters out there or so, I watched them hit one. I mean, I was looking at the truck when it hit it. And I mean, just explosion. I mean, this truck just looked like it got disintegrated. I mean, tires, parts, metal, stuff just went flying everywhere. And when everybody stopped and turned to look at the truck, and that was the only truck we had in that movement that looked like one of the regular hatchback Humvee trucks that had a turret on it and everything. And man, that truck was laid over on its side whenever the dust settled. And as the dust had cleared, I remember looking at that truck. It was kind of laying on its side, and out of that turret, I saw this guy's head poke out. He turned and looked back toward us, and he started doing his hands like this, and everybody was like, "Yeah!" They're all jumping and celebrating again, and flipping the city off, and "F you," just.
The joy of still being alive. After
Oh
something
yeah,
like that
yeah,
is
absolutely, man. And
overwhelming.
but it was an interesting time. But I remember my platoon sergeant was like, "Hey, everybody, stop hopping around."
Yeah.
He's like, "We're in a minefield right now." He's like, "Just stop moving." And then everybody got real serious and just everybody crawled onto the nearest truck to him and was just sitting there. And man, we were just sitting ducks for several hours.
Wow.
They ended up having to send some engineers out there, the old minesweepers, man. And I mean, just
They found
like
a lot.
You guys
yeah,
didn't
like
have any EOD units out there to help?
yeah, that's what they sent
Yeah.
out there, man. And I remember those guys coming over the hill with a couple 5-ton trucks behind them, dude. And I mean, it was just like in the old Vietnam movies where those guys are sweeping the ground, man, and they made their way all the way to us. Wow. And, and I can't remember if they had marked some other stuff that they had found or if the particular path they had taken to get to us was clear. But it was like, man, we had definitely entered something that had been a minefield. And, just to show, we had a big saying in the fob that said "complacency kills." And as I use that story, I'm just like, man, it's just everywhere over there. was just bad news. I mean, again, the war had changed. The war wasn't over. And
did you guys start using sandbags, in the front?
Yeah, there was stuff that had started being done
like,
after that.
We need a sandbag back here. We need to sandbag the front, where everybody's feet are.
Yeah. And but going back to what you was mentioning about the story was my buddy that had put all those blast blankets in the bed for me. Like, had he not done that, I mean, I probably wouldn't be here talking right now. And it's, there's several other stories. You could go on all day long like that, with stuff. But yeah, that was Pritchard, and he just kind of showed back up on social media after all these years, so he'll appreciate that story. He's the kind of guy that laughs every time you bring stuff like that up. Pritchard was a good guy. He was a guy that
thank God he did that, huh?
Oh yeah, and Pritchard was the guy. He was the kind of guy that when we got back from deployment, we wasn't back 3 or 4 days, and they said they needed another operator to fill a spot. He wasn't back here 3 or 4 days, and he volunteered, and he went right back over. By the time we come off of our little small leave from coming back, he was already gone again. But, we'd be on an OP somewhere doing a surveillance in the city, and he's the kind of guy when we get settled in, he'd come over and say, "Hey, just so you know, man, I got like 6 extra grenades in my butt pouch. Something goes on."
Just in case you need some.
Yeah, he was just that guy, dude. He always had extra stuff on him. Just a good guy to have in your team.
So Nick, after that deployment, so you came back, and then kind of, can you walk us through just, I think we mentioned last time we talked like a little bit about your family life coming back, and then you went back out again, and there was something with your papers. Is that the next deployment, or did you have more?
No. So leading up to this deployment that I did in 2004, my heart's desire, my marriage was gotten really strained. My wife, us being young with a newborn, Texans in California. I mean, it was just hard for us to fit in. She's by herself all the time. I was always gone training. If I wasn't if I was not training and I was at home mentally, I just still was not at home. And
were you guys up in Pendleton?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's not beautiful Coronado.
No.
Anymore. It's up in the.
Yeah, and I think that this is a very, very tough thing. I think on a married couple. I think any military life is in general, but I think even in these smaller teams, man. I mean, if you're not doing some crazy training op, you're at a school, getting trained up even more so. You're just gone all the time, and this was really hard for her. Our marriage was pretty strained, and so she had moved back to Texas to be with her family. And in my mind, this is kind of where my mind was at the time. I know this sounds bad now, but it wasn't that I didn't care, but she was not number one. My job was number one, and that's what I wanted to do with my life. And I felt that was the right place to be at the time. And somewhere in there, I just kind of, we had a church that we was a part of, but somewhere I had kind of drifted from that. And I remember trying to put in my re-enlistment package. When you're trying to re-enlist, you got to submit paperwork. It's got to be approved and all this stuff. And I remember trying to do that before I'd come home. We had deployed in February of 2004, and I was set to get out in late April, early May, and that's when my term of enlistment was going to be up. And so I'd already done a small workup with my team. We already was told when we was deploying. So I was trying to get my re-enlistment stuff done before we deployed. And I remember, coming back to the faith part of everything in my life, I remember for some reason my paperwork kept getting messed up. And it would come back and say, "Oh, you need to redo it," and which is not normal. And so we'd redo another package, send it in. It was taking forever. And then, "Oh man, something got left out of it. You got to redo it." And we had left to go home on Christmas leave. And I remember getting back home for a couple weeks and being around my mom and dad. And naturally, I was going to church several times a week and, seeing a lot of people that from back at home, from when I was a teenager, and them seeing a transformation in my life, and getting preached to a little bit, getting back in God's Word, and then getting to see my son. God just started dealing with me when I was at home. And I remember heading back out to California when leave was over. And, man, God's just working on my heart. Real similar to how my dad tells his story. And I was somewhere in, I think, Arizona. And, I mean, in the middle of nowhere. And I just remember just feeling real burdened. And, I tried to turn the radio up. I tried pulling over, getting stuff to eat, and just trying to shake it off. Like, hey, man, I got to get my head back in the game. But I remember just having to pull over in the middle of nowhere and park my truck on the side of the road and get out and just kind of walk around. And I just started praying. I'm like, man, I need help here. I need to get my head back in the game. Like, I'm about to deploy. I've got all this stuff going on. I'm trying to re-enlist. And I had just kind of accepted that my marriage wasn't going to work out. I was going to do this with my life. My kid probably was not going to know who I was. And in our company had a pretty high divorce rate at the time. I think all special units do, as I hear the stories told across the board. But
yeah, it's 90% in the SEAL teams.
Yeah, and I think it's something the same in ours. I mean, in fact,
I think it's like 80% in the regular military, and then you get into the special forces.
Yeah,
all the branches of special forces, because we're all gone. This is around that 90%.
Yeah, I think our company, the guys had nicknamed it First Force Divorce.
Yeah.
And just to give you an idea of what special units deal with. Again, like you said, I think it's all military, especially during this phase with deployments and stuff. But I remember standing on the side of the road and just praying and talking to God like, hey, I need some help. I need to get my head back in the game here. And, God's never audibly talked to me the way we're talking now, but there's been a few times in my life where it might as well have been, what he's laid on my heart and convicted me about. It might as well have been audible. And I remember standing on the side of the road, and it was like, hey, if you don't do anything else I've called you to do, you need to at least be there and point your child toward me, and I've always told everyone I tell this story to be very careful. Like, I don't believe you make deals with God. God makes the deals. You just have the choice to accept it or not. Yeah. And but I remember,
or listen to him or not.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I remember standing there on the side of the road thinking, man, these guys, my team is counting on me. I've been a part of this team. I've done a workup with them. And I remember asking God, like, hey, if you'll just keep your hand on me and help me fulfill my obligation, I'll go wherever you tell me to go. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And so instead of re-enlisting, I remember getting back to formation after leave was over, and my platoon sergeant was like, hey, your paperwork came back clear, like you can do the re-enlistment ceremony whenever you want, kind of deal. And I was like, wow, how does that work? It's like the timing. And I remember going in and telling my platoon sergeant, like, hey, look, Gunny, here's the deal. I'm gonna extend my contract so I can deploy, but after I get done with deployment, I need to head back home and focus on my kid. And so I was able to extend my contract for a year and deploy with my team. And when I got back, you spend several months.
Were they offering you guys bonuses at the time?
I think there was re-enlistment bonuses at the time. Yeah. I can't remember how much it was, but it wasn't a lot. And again, at the time for me, it wasn't about the money. It's just what I wanted to do.
Ours were always hard to say no to.
Yeah.
Like my first one was $70,000 tax free. Yeah. And I was like,
yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah.
After how many years? After how many years did they offer you that?
That was for, I don't know, 4 or 5 more.
Okay. Yeah.
You know,
Usually it comes in the contract usually comes in 4 years.
Yeah.
So and that's what I wanted to do.
I don't know. I never kept. I never told them no, really. So I always just kept. You know.
Four more.
I think that's what a lot of guys do. A lot of my buddies that stayed in and retired out, it was like, yeah, I'm gonna do 4 more, man. I'm probably gonna get out. And 4 would come up, and then I'm probably gonna hang out a little bit more, and then I'll get out. And then, by the time you cross 10 or 12 years, you might as well go ahead and see it through at that point. If you physically can. Again, it just depends on your family situation, if you have one, and where you're at physically. Because all that stuff takes a toll on your body, and most of the guys that stay in and do that, they want to operate. They don't want to teach. They want to be in a team. They want to be out there doing the stuff. But I'd extended my contract for a year just so I could deploy.
How did that deployment go? How did that deployment go? Were you in the Huseba again, or
no? That was the deployment.
That was okay.
I've told you guys a story about like that. I extended so I could go do that deployment with my team and come back, and I did. Once I came back, it took a few months to process out, and I moved back to Fort Worth, and that was where things got kind of rough again. Coming from being a part of a unit like that and being needed, being valuable, we've talked about this a little bit. This is where the wheels come off the bus for people.
Well, for a lot of veterans, right? Very
much so.
Yeah.
And in my observation, for my personal experience and what I see guys deal with, you come out of an environment like that. And I remember moving back here and just hating the world. I had a very black heart. And I could put on a front and go to church. I'd started trying to work on myself the best I could. And I remember but hating the world. I remember coming off that deployment and 3 days later, my mom and dad had come seeing us get off the bus. And I remember them wanting to go to Disneyland, and a few days later, I just was over running the streets of, Huseba in Iraq a week and a half prior, and then, we fly back, and a few days later, my mom and dad's just glad to see me come off the bus, and they wanted to go to Disneyland, and I remember being in Disneyland and just looking around at everybody just walking around, having a great time, just without a care in the world, just people coming and going everywhere, and just really struggling with that. My dad could see it.
Why do you think so? Did you struggle with PTSD, or why do you think you were so angry?
I think it was a combination of things. I look back on that and I still ask that question a lot. I try to revisit some of those feelings.
I'm not trying to bring up old stuff.
Yeah. Oh no, I know. And I now I prefer to talk about it because if it can help anybody, is what I want. But man, I remember it being a combination of things. From day to day, it would seem different. But I think you just come off. You come out of those environments. It just takes a little while to decompress. Because you have to find a level of hate somewhere in you. Again, I know that sounds horrible, but you have to find a level of hate to function in certain environments.
You have to be very capable of violence and violence against another human being, and that's different than jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
That's different than just MMA fighting. Like, you're taking someone's life.
Yes.
For forever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and and it's just and not only that, you're just seeing and just hearing everything in those environments is about, it's about war. I mean, it's, like I was saying, you could be laying, if you're in a bunk somewhere in a fob and just hearing explosions go off in the city all the time, and then you're listening to the radios and this cat team got hit, this squad got hit. I mean, it's nonstop. It's every day. It becomes normal. And, and I remember coming back from that environment, and once I moved back to Fort Worth, I had nowhere to stay. Yeah. I'm living on my mom and dad's couch until I got on my feet. And I remember trying to lay down one night and just thinking, man, how did I go from being, like you said, you're treated like a rock star, to just, man, I'm just like not needed anywhere right now.
I'm just a dude.
And no one cares, and I hate to say no one cares. Everybody wants to pat you on the back, and I do
thank you
believe
for your service.
Thank you for your service. Yeah. And
when they find out, but most people don't know who you are. And when you're out in public, you're just a dude.
Yeah.
They don't know 2 weeks ago you might have been shooting bad guys in the face or bandaging up your buddy.
Yeah, and that's where I think that's where people struggle coming off of that. And for me, it was just, I had the marital issues that I had at the time. We weren't actually divorced, me and my wife. She was waiting on me, and I think she was planning on us trying to fix things. And now that I chose to get out and come back to Fort Worth, but because I came back with the mental and emotional condition I was in, I was just angry at her. I think I was just trying to find something, a reason to be mad at everything. I was like, well, you ruined my career. I'm here because you moved back here. So I went ahead and pushed forward and had divorced her. I just was just mad at the fact that I'm like, man, you are a part of a high-level team, high-level guys. You're surrounded. Everybody you communicate and deal with is a high-level individual, and that didn't exist. Not to take away from being around my support system and my family, but it's different. They didn't speak the same language I did. They didn't look at things the same way I did. And again,
experiences.
Yeah, and just adjusting to living a life in the civilian world where it's like, man, everybody's just kind of doing what they want. I mean, somebody just wants to call in sick, they call in sick. Somebody wants to cut you off in the parking lot and just, and when you're in the military, and especially in these special units, I mean, there's just a demeanor, even on base. You walk across to the PX somewhere on base, and there's just a level of respect from one service member to the other, usually. And
there's a whole rank system too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just and it's just mass in my mind. It was just mass chaos everywhere, and and just trying to deal with the issues we talked about a little bit. When people talk about why I think combat veterans have a hard time sleeping at night, is for me, my experience was the first time I tried to lay down and go to sleep, and I wasn't on base or in my team. It was like, well, this is weird, like we're just all going to lay down and go to sleep at the same time. And your mind's telling you this stuff is not okay. Somebody needs to be awake. Somebody needs to be watching something. And that takes a little while to decompress from that stuff. And I mean,
for me as a SEAL, we did everything at night.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we were always sleeping during the day.
Yeah.
You got to come back and you switch it backwards,
Yeah, and it's the same thing in a recon team, I mean, from going through BRC, when you did these long-range surveillance patrols and stuff, before the sun comes up, you get in a harbor site somewhere, and you dig in, you get in a tactical harbor site, set guns up facing in all directions, you get a sleep rotation going on, and you got these three guys are up while these three guys are down. You've always got a 360 perimeter at all times, and you're hidden, and you're still as possible while the sun's up, so you're not caught. And that's the way you're taught from day one to be in a special team. And but man, it's just like the whole sleep thing is just, even to this day, sometimes it's kind of weird. I even think, I'm like, yeah, no, you're not I live in Keller, Texas. It's not combat going on there, but sometimes you're just like, man, who's lurking around my house when I'm not sleeping, kind of thing.
We talked a little bit about PTSD last time, and I'm lucky I didn't suffer from it. I think that's just the way kind of God made me. But I also, I was in a long time. I did 22 years. But before I got out, I also took instructor duty. And that gave me 3 years to kind of adjust.
Yeah.
But someone like yourself, you just come off deployment, and then like you came back, and then like, man, not only are you not with your brothers anymore, now you're just back in the world trying to figure it out. So I can see why guys that, just come back off deployment and all of a sudden they get out and they're like, okay, I'm out now, and a lot of them want to be out, but then they don't know how to transition.
Yeah.
Because there's no space in between. So I can see why that's such a struggle for some of them. And, we kind of talked a little bit about last time about giving them purpose again. And I think that's what's hard, especially with the guys like you. You were in a high-speed unit, right?
Yeah.
And, well, what was your purpose?
Yeah.
You got back here, and it probably took you a little while to find that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it did. The purpose, I think, was the big driving factor for me, because I felt like I had lost my purpose. And I think going back to faith, for me as a believer, because I drifted from that already a little bit mentally, man, the Lord's always been there for me. Even in my worst moments, He's never not been there. And I've never forgotten that. But you drift, your focus gets off, you start making the main things are no longer the main things, and then things just start getting a little spread out. And I think coming back, it was hard for me to get dialed and focused on that, although that was the new mission. Was, hey, being some kind of a reputable father to my son and pointing my son toward Christ was the number one mission. Mm-hmm. But I had a hard time walking that when I first got back. And as a matter of fact, I'd come really close to actually going back in and re-enlisting and just like, man, this is not working the way I thought it would. I need to just get back where I belong.
It's simple.
Yeah.
Life is simple then, right? It's not complicated.
Yep.
Right? You have your mission, you have your rank structure. You come back and you're like, oh, well, now I have to be a husband and a father, but, there's no standard operating procedures.
No.
For being a husband and a father. You'd read the manual on it if it was there, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's not there. It's complicated. It's working with other humans that maybe don't have the same mission you do.
Yeah, right? I agree. Yeah, that's exactly a struggle.
Yeah.
SOPs, man. That's I use that term a lot with my company, and you probably are familiar with this too. I mean, I keep wanting to bring back, and one of my buddies that I was actually deployed with, a buddy Brandon of mine, he comes in a couple times a year right now, and we hunt together. And he actually showed up in place of the guy I told you got blowed up. First couple of weeks we got to Iraq, he showed up over there in place of him, and that's how he and I met. And we become really good friends during that time. And here in this later part of life, we've been a good support system for each other. He's a real high-level black belt out in San Diego, California. Grappling Dynamics is his gym. He did some pro MMA. He's got a record, wrestling background. Just a fighter. Yeah. Had been in reconnaissance teams for years prior to me getting there. Been a really good support system for each other over the years. He's the one that got me into jiu-jitsu.
Nice.
And so he's been somebody to crutch on over the years, along with good training partners and coaches. And he had ventured into hunting about the same time I had found jiu-jitsu through him. So we kind of helped each other.
Nice.
And, but he... that's how I had met him, and that it was always good to kind of stay in touch with some of these guys. Some of these guys stayed in, so it was hard for me to stay in touch with them. Some of them got out, and then, they just kind of fall off the map for a while. Like some of these guys, it takes them quite a while for they discover social media.
Yeah.
Some of them are just against it every step of the way for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But but the SOPs are a big one. You hear people all the time say, "Well, this isn't the military." I'm like, yeah. I mean, my response is, trust me, I know. Like, I can tell. Like, it's super chaotic. And
My
if it
boo would be up your ass already.
yeah, like, we would straighten this shit out right now if it was. I promise.
You'd be at the tree line.
And those are the things that you miss. And I think that's why veterans are stereotyped into thinking, oh, man, you talk like this is the military. It's not the military. But those principles work. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why we have boot camp. Mm-hmm. You can't just sign up and go straight into a unit. Boot camp, you bring in people from all over the country, from different discipline backgrounds, different financial backgrounds, different cultures. Mm-hmm. And, I always tell people all the time, I'm like, you got 30 and 40-year-old CEOs, and hey, they're great, successful business people. But man, these people get off these buses at boot camp and they don't even know how to stand in line correctly. I mean, and that's why they have yellow footprints when you get off the bus. It's not because they're trying to make military look cool. They've recognized the fact that somebody here doesn't even know how to stand in a line correctly, and we're going to fix that on day one. And so, but being in the civilian world and trying to come up with SOPs and, in the military, you get away from your team where everybody looks the same, talks the same. You're on the same page at all times. I mean, you can communicate without talking. Yeah. I mean, like, you can just look at each other. And it's a funny thing. I was talking about creeds, all the teams have them, and you memorize these things. And during the time you're going through training, you kind of mock these things and make fun of them a little bit. But later in life, I'm like, man, in the Reconnaissance Creed, I was reading it the other night, and I was like, you can speak without saying a word. Mm-hmm. And I just remember that. It's like, even on some of these patrols, you got hand signals. You just look at each other, and you kind of know. You know how to communicate and move.
You know who everyone is just by the way they walk and their silhouette. You're just like, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like before you stack on a door, before you enter a room, you don't have to look behind you and say, hey, you get this corner, I'll get this corner. Yeah. It's like you literally just walk up behind somebody and say, with you, and you go in the room and you both know what the assignment is.
Predictability of your team.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everything is well-oiled and functions at a high rate. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's high levels of business, there's high levels of sports. I mean, being in jiu-jitsu, I mean, we all speak that language. And to get on a high level in anything takes a lot of discipline and dedication. And I think that's where veterans benefit from things like jiu-jitsu. I wish I would have found it the day I got out.
When did you start training after you got out?
I started training in January of 2016.
Okay.
So that was, and I wished I would have found that the day I got out. Yeah. Nobody had told me. It would have given me a very strong outlet. And as a believer, I also want to say, the number one thing that was said to me all the time was like, well, you just need to draw closer to the Lord. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. Trust me, I know that's the whole mission. I came back. But the Bible does talk about that our spirit's at constant war with our flesh at all times. And, the battles I may be fighting are different than the ones Randy's fighting or that you're fighting, but our flesh is always wanting to do something different than what us as believers, our spirit wants to do. And those battles can be pretty tense sometimes. And, having outlets like jiu-jitsu, I think, are very beneficial for veterans.
I think it helps them feel like a warrior again. I mean, you're not hunting the enemy where they live or anything anymore.
Right.
But you do get to pair yourself against someone else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a battle.
Yep.
It's a 5-6 minute battle, but it's a battle.
Yep.
And then you move on to the next one and the next one. And it's, I don't know. I fell in love with it too, obviously. So Nick, you recently got promoted to black belt.
I did.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
How does that feel?
So been asked that question a lot. Not like I thought it would feel.
Yeah.
You know, I remember starting jiu-jitsu and being as involved as I was in the beginning. I trained all the time, still do. Anybody that knows me, I train, you know,
Train a
a
lot.
couple of times a day. I train a lot, probably more than
How
I
old are
should.
you, Nick?
I am 44. I'll be 45 in July.
And you're still able to train a couple times a
Couple
day?
times a day, man, and trying to incorporate some morning sessions over with the pro training group. But you know, that's a different level of training too. So try to train as much as I possibly can. Most would probably say it's not healthy, but again, it's an outlet more than it is anything.
Well, and if your body can take it, right? Like, I'm 5 years older than you. I can't train 2 days anymore.
Yeah,
You know,
it's rough.
Not with, you know, the type of people that I roll with anyways.
Yeah, these guys right here.
Yeah. This guy, he'll get tired of balling me up. But.
Oh yeah, the pro training session. I've been trying to get over there about once a week right now, and they one of the guys at the gym was asking me the other day. He's like, "Man, what's that like over there?" I'm like, "Oh, dude," I'm like, I go in there. I'm like, I'm just working on my soul. That's all I'm working on is my soul, dude. Like, I am just trying to survive and give my best with these guys. I mean, because it's a pace pusher. It's not like your normal jiu-jitsu sessions. You got Stefan's in there, Pedro's in there. I'm still getting familiar with some of the other guys' faces that are
D1 guys.
Yeah, they're just all
wrestlers, yeah.
D1 wrestlers. You got Coach Nate, Mickey. Mickey's a special forces guy. You know, he's a high-level jiu-jitsu guy, and they're just pushing the pace. I mean, in between rounds in the specific sparring we're doing squats, we're running laps, we're doing sprints.
Assault bikes.
Burpees,
Yeah.
assault bikes. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and then your rest in between these stations is to walk around the mat holding a 45-pound plate like high boat carry. You know
Didn't
how
you
bad
invite
those
me to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why the hell would I do that to myself?
Just stay for the rounds. Just stay for the rounds. You know? I will say, like Nick the other day.
Do you hate me now? What's going on?
Like Nick the other day, we were locking up, and I just wanted to go home and sleep. I was so tired, and I hear Nick and Pedro over. I hear him speaking behind me, and I hear Nick going, "I'll see you at noon class in about an hour." And I turn around, I'm like, "What? Like, I'm going home to sleep." What do you mean noon class? Yeah, I'm going to noon class, and I think I'll train again tonight. I was like, "Man, that's another level."
Oh, dude.
Badass. I
I'm gonna
respect
go
that
home
so
and
much.
take a crying game shower.
Yeah, we were doing sprints around the room the other day, and I was running, and I looked behind. He's just right pace with me. That's cool. I was like, man, he's right behind me. You know, but that's good, right? It's like the whole teammate thing.
It is.
You know, and you're gonna push as hard as the guy next to you, and so you know, as long as you have a group of good guys, I think it just elevates.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's awesome.
I
I'm
think
just
actually-
joking, by the way.
Well, I know you got to come sometime. You'll come. I'll get you in there
I'll
once the
come
hip heals up.
once my hip is healthy again.
And I think the environment too, which is where I try to tell people all the time. I'm like, man, I tell these young guys that come into things like jiu-jitsu, I'm like, man, you don't know how fortunate you are to find this at your age, and especially these guys that aren't married, don't have kids,
Nick, yeah.
you know, and they've got a decent job. And I'm like, man, the sky's the limit for you guys because you can really make this something. And then to get to be around the high level guys that I'm fortunate to be around with jiu-jitsu, Pedro's my professor, he's my coach, and really close friend. I mean, couldn't have a better guy.
I hear nothing but good things about him.
And you won't hear nothing but good things about the guy. I mean, it's just, it's not just the training of jiu-jitsu with him. You know, it was his testimony is why I switched over to train under him. I'd already knew who he was. How can you not know who he is if you do jiu-jitsu? But I'd come over to his gym to see one of my training.
Well, it's another thing to be. It's one thing to be famous, like in the sport. It's another thing for everybody. Like, this guy's an amazing person and a great dude, right?
It's very rare both.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a small
rare,
percentage
rare
in most in all sports, really. But I had a buddy that when I'd started jiu-jitsu, and we'd trained over the years together, had started training under Pedro and was getting his black belt.
Who was that?
Charlie.
Okay.
And but he was getting his black belt, and they was having a ceremony for it, and so I was invited to it. And man, I went over there, and when I was there to, you know, it was kind of an open mat type deal, and then they do the ceremony, But the testimony that Charlie had given me about Pedro was really encouraging to me as a Christian. I spent a lot of time doing jiu-jitsu, probably more than I should. You know, I own a business, and but I'm always trying to squeeze something in. You know, I'm that way with hunting and everything else, and it may be something I developed from my military time. But Pedro's testimony, and I don't mean what he just stood up there and said, just what I got from being around the guy, what little time I was. I remember going and telling my wife, like, hey, you know, I'd like to come over here and sign up and just train and be in the environment. You know, we'll pray after every training session. And, you know, and
Nice. That's cool.
On behalf of 413, you know, we tell everybody all the time, it's not a church, but
So what does 413 stand for?
413
For
is
our listeners.
Philippians 4:13, and Pedro has an awesome testimony behind why he settled on that. And, you know, I'd encourage to have him on, tell
we
his
will, for
story,
sure,
because I don't want to tell the story and mess it up, but the testimony I can relate with things in my life and when he tells it. But after every training session, you know, we huddle up and we pray. And for me, what's powerful about that is, man, you got a lot of people that circle up, and I don't even know if they know why this is important. I think they just want to be a part of something. And then some of them have started going to church. Some of them are just literally being encouraged outside of jiu-jitsu with the people they've met there and the environment itself.
What a
And
great example.
yeah, exactly. And for my kids, this is what I want. I spend a lot of time doing stuff, and I'd like to try to find ways to honor the Lord with it the best I can. Okay, and that is easier said than done sometimes. But Pedro, Stephanie, the whole group over there, it's just a great environment. Now I get to where it's not just looking forward to the training. I'm just looking forward to a positive environment.
And the people, yeah. It's so
You have to be
important.
around. Everybody's working toward a goal. Everybody over there, and Pedro's training program is very well designed. Like, he's got a process that we go through, and my jiu-jitsu has leveled up quite a bit since I've been there. But yeah, even just the push though. I mean, I tell my buddies all the time, like, hey, I mean, you come over here, it doesn't matter if you're purple, brown, or whatever. Like, dude, our blue belts are going to choke you over here, dude, for sure. Like, it's just different.
Yeah.
And, you know, but then to just get off the mat and just the conversations taking place and the praying, and no one's ever pressured to do it. You know, we've had people come in and train and they're like, hey, I don't want to, but they find themselves kind of hanging around and just kind of like listening. You know, I see them.
You can tell when something's special,
Yeah.
you know, and it's only a matter of time before you want to be a part of it.
Yeah, I agree. And how would you not want to be around a group of people like that?
Sure.
And and everyone else that I've known that has known Pedro for years, like Stefan, I mean, it's a consistent report. And like we was talking about earlier, I mean, I think that should be all of our goal in life, is we want to be consistent in our morals and principles, and you do that by also surrounding yourself with people that are trying to follow those same guidelines for their same SOPs for their life.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
You know, as a believer.
Well, we keep each other accountable.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
We got SOPs as believers, man, and it's written right there. We have it in writing, and but yeah, that's. But I ended up getting promoted in December, right at the end of December, for the turn of the year, and yeah, so in that, what an honor to get it from somebody
for
like
sure.
Pedro.
For sure.
You know, he's not. I mean, he's a high level guy. He doesn't just.
Hand them out, yeah.
Yeah, and that was something with jiu-jitsu for me. It was that the belts were never really a thing for me. I mean, it's kind of hard for them not to kind of be something, because it is a part of jiu-jitsu. They're neat. But in our Western culture, they're not always a true reflection of just mat ability for me.
Merit, yeah.
What's important to me, you know, and I've talked about this with Pedro several times. I'm like, you know, everybody's desire with things like jiu-jitsu is different. We're all after something different. And but I'm like, man, the ability is what to keep people focus on getting better. Okay, like if the powers to be ever came through and said, hey, we're going to do away with all belt colors in jiu-jitsu, everybody's going to wear the same color belt. And I'm like, how many people do you think would quit doing jiu-jitsu right away because there's no self-gratification and, you know, their belt just went away, their colored belt just went away. And it's like, well, what do you mean I can't stand further down the wall ahead of every new guy that signs up? It's like, no. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, that is cool. As a military guy, I like all of that stuff, but people lose their focus and they get very focused on this thing and not
on making it about the belt.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's more with the journey, however cliche
Yeah.
that sounds. But Nick, just to bring it back a little bit, I don't mean to interrupt this too much, but you talked about getting back after that last deployment, and then you said you had divorced your wife at the time. Could you just walk us kind of through that a little? I think we didn't really finish there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of hear the
For
the
sure.
rest of that. Yeah.
So, you know, it took me a little while. It took me a couple of probably almost 3 years for God to kind of shave some of those calluses off my heart and kind of get my mind and my head really dialed on what the original mission was by getting out. And as I started getting more focused and dialed in there, I started getting really involved in serving and you know, my relationship with God had started getting a little stronger at the time. And I started, you know, developing a new mission too vocationally. Like I focused on HVAC. I could not be a cop or a firefighter or something like that. It was too paramilitary, and it just, you know, it just was not meant for me. But I'm a mechanical guy, so I started focusing on going to trade school, going to the junior college to be an HVAC mechanic. And it's a hard job. There's another reason why I like it. I mean, not everybody can do this. But I'd started focusing on trying to spend a little more time with my son, was something I was getting more convicted about. And in turn, felt like, hey, you know, I went to Carrie. So at the time, she was my ex-wife. And I just said, hey, you know, like, we're be a team. Let's do this together. You know, let's do this different than most people would do a situation like this. She started going to church. We started going to church together with my son when he was young. And we started spending some time together, some afternoons. And, man, it started getting kind of pleasant to be around each other again. And some time went on doing this when I woke up and I was getting ready for work one morning, and it hit me like God started dealing with me again. I mean, like being all around the side of the road we talked about earlier, it was like, man, what are you doing? You know, it's like you're spending all this time with her. It seems to be great. Like, you know, it's a family thing. And it's like it just hit me. It's like, and like, that's my wife. And I had to shake that off because I'm like, it's not my wife. We got divorced. And God started dealing with my heart in that area quite a bit about where I had failed and kind of where I needed to get in a place to try to make things right and even better than what it had seemed to be at that moment. And I remember scheduling a meeting to go talk with my pastor. And my pastor was also my friend. He's very, very, very strong counselor when I would go visit with him. But I remember going and sitting down with him and saying, hey, this is kind of what I've got going on in my heart. And the reason I wanted to talk to him is I'm like, man, I've got to shake this off. This can't be right. Like, this just seems out there. You know, I'm trying to do the right thing, but, you know, these emotions are getting in the way. And I remember going and talking to him about that. And I'm like, yeah, man, I woke up the other morning. I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure I still love her. You know, but like, everything's good right now. I don't want to mess this up. But I'm like, but I kind of want to work this back out. Is that not a crazy thought? And I mean, he's just staring at me across his desk. You know, he's kind of rubbing his chin and looking at me really serious and concerned. And I'm thinking he's like, yeah, that's a little out there, you know. And but man, he just looked at me and he goes, I just have one question. He goes, why are you telling me all of this? You know, and hinting at, why aren't you talking to her about this? And I'm like, okay. So, man, I remember right away, I just remember going and talking with her about some things that God had laid on my heart, and in my mind, as arrogant as maybe it's a self thing, maybe it's a team guy thing, I don't know, but I just thought, okay, I'll just go scoop her back up, and then we'll just start over where we left off. And I remember approaching her one evening with this, and I was like, hey, look, we'll just get back together and work this out, right? And she was like, oh no. She was like, you were a monster to me. She was like, you were horrible. And she was like, I like things just the way they are. You're a good guy right now. She was like, everything's going great. Why are you bringing this up? And I just remember being like, no, yeah, we're going to work it out. We'll be just fine. You'll see. It'll all be good,
We tend to do things with willpower.
Yes.
You're like, I will will this to happen.
Yes, yes.
I will make it come true.
I've done several things that were impossible, and
Sounds like you kind of willed it, though.
yeah, man. And I just didn't let up on it, and actually over probably, I want to say the better part of a couple months of constantly staying at this, it actually started getting kind of tense between us. Like, she started kind of avoiding me a little bit. It was like, hey, why don't you take him out this afternoon and I'll just stay here. And so I had backed off of it when I saw that happening. And I just kept praying about it. And I just was like, I'm not going to give up on this. I feel like this is what's supposed to happen. And, I gave it a little bit of time. And then I remember putting a lot of prayer on this and approaching it again with her. And when I brought it up, it was like, man, it was all war. I mean, it was like, no, I mean, everything was being pulled out. I mean, it turned into a pretty big argument. And I just kept stating my case. I'm like, I'm not giving up on this. And I just wore down in that one argument, man. And it was just a few months after that. Wow. We was actually getting remarried, man. And we got remarried. My pastor at the time, he had was like, hey, look, we're going to do something unique with this. We're not going to tell anybody in the church. He's like, everybody's going to come in the evening service like it's a normal church service. He's like, and little they know they're coming to a wedding ceremony. That's cool. And he designed the entire wedding ceremony around, it was a sermon that evening on reconciliation and how we, being sinners, was reconciled to God through what Christ did on the cross. And all of it's always through Christ, and how Christ was a big part of the reconciliation of our marriage. And just, but the message was awesome. But people showed up for church, and it was just like they were coming into normal church service. And then right when the service started, they started playing the wedding music, and my wife walked down the aisle, and I stood up in the front, and everybody's like, what's going on? It was pretty cool.
That was really cool.
We didn't know about this. Are we supposed to be here?
Yeah. But God blessed, man. We got 2 more kids, so we got 3 kids total, and we got an HVAC business that has grown over the years.
What's the name of your company?
Texas Air Pro.
Okay,
Yeah.
Texas Air Pro.
Yeah.
So if anybody needs any HVAC, they should call Texas Air Pro.
Yeah.
All right.
Come look us up, man. That's what we do. We primarily focus on repair, maintenance, and retrofitting install equipment. Mm-hmm. We don't do a whole lot of new construction. We do some of it, but most of it's maintenance and repair and install. My wife works in the office. My oldest son works full time for us. He kind of runs the shop.
So when you mean maintenance, do you mean like, is it for residential or for commercial or both?
Both. We do both. Yep.
So like those yearly checks.
Yes.
Right. Where people like, all right, it's about to turn cold again, or it's about to turn hot again here soon.
Yep.
Right. Let's be sure that AC is going to kick on before it's 100 degrees out.
Yep. That's us. Yeah. We're getting ready to do a bunch of that for the summer over the next couple of months.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I bet. Good for you. I hope it's very successful. Well, you've been successful.
Yeah.
That's great. So that's awesome.
Anything else, Nick? You want to touch on anything else?
Anything else you'd like to share?
I just, a lot of people ask me, and this is for veterans in general. I just think that nowadays you don't have to go too far to find a veteran, anybody really. But my heart, especially as I'm getting a little older, my heart for veterans, and especially young ones, man, I wished I'd have had somebody. I had a lot of people to spiritually encourage me, but I wished I'd have found a group of people say, hey, I've got something that's hard to do over here. Why don't you come be a part of this group? And things like jiu-jitsu. But I think trying to get people involved and get them in a group. And as always, I'm always going to try to point people toward the Lord. At least my heart's desire is to. I probably fail at doing that sometimes, but, without Christ, none of this stuff really matters. You probably, by my story, has been a big part of it.
Well, Nick, I kind of told you this earlier, but, we posted that little bit of this podcast before, and there's been more responses to that. So I think one of the ways you probably point people to the Lord is by the example you set every day. We had so many people
character testaments and everything.
Like, oh,
really cool to see.
Nick,
I knew that was going to happen, but
oh, you got Nick
Yeah.
on the show. That guy's awesome. He's such a great guy. He's this, he's that, and it was more than Stefan and I ever got, I think, combined. So I mean, just what a great opportunity to have you on the show, and just a testament to your character, to how many people. So I think maybe just the example you're leading every day is probably pointing people to Christ as well, just so you know that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't have any other questions.
I don't know.
Stefan?
No, I'm good.
No?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for sharing the story. If you're in the DFW area, hit up Nick for any HVAC business you have. Keep tuning into the show, subscribe, kind of help us drive in the algorithm and get up there. We're just trying to bring on awesome people like Nick, that have unique backgrounds, something to share. So thank you for watching, and be on the lookout for the next Patriot Point episode coming out soon.